Mojang just added the Sulfur Caves, filled with new sulfur and cinnabar blocks and the attribute-changing Sulfur Cube mob. But there's more lying under the surface of this cave biome that promises to change the future of Minecraft Worldgen forever. Let's take a look at what the Sulfur Caves bring to the world on a technical level, and then we can explore how its addition can be applied to custom Worldgen. The first, though certainly not the most meaningful change, is one that I mentioned in my end update video, which is the reintroduction of water as a fluid for the lake feature. Sulfur Caves use lakes extensively to decorate and add just more texture and variety to the ground of this cave biome, and it's clear that although this bug fix was done in 26.1.2, that it was done for the Sulfur Caves to great effect. And it's a really welcome bug fix because lakes are an awesome feature to decorate all kinds of custom biomes with, especially now with the additional fields they've added to the lake feature that give you more control over what blocks different parts of it are allowed to replace. In other news, Sulfur Caves also brought a new surface rule type, which is used to cover most of the terrain here with these sulfur and cinnabar blocks. You can see if we dig into here, it isn't just on the walls, the ground, and the ceiling like might be done with vegetation patches, especially for walls and ceiling. Because it's done with surface rules, it covers pretty deep into the stone, pretty much the entire stone and, of course, deep slate layer as you get down that low. Now, this does have a bit of a negative effect gameplay-wise, as it means ores are much less common in the Sulfur Cave biomes, since most of the terrain is made out of these sulfur and cinnabar blocks. Though we do have these stripes of stone and deep slate, there's just far less valid spawning spaces for those ore features to fill in and decorate the biome with. This, of course, is a trade-off that Mojang accepted in pursuit of making these new blocks very accessible so that players could build with them, of course, and all the various new block variants that came with them. From a technical level, having more surface rule types is theoretically nice, especially one that allows for 3D noise like this, but especially when you consider the trade-off of the ores as you get deeper into the terrain, usually using features is probably still going to be better both for gameplay and for performance in order to decorate the surfaces of caves like this. The real way in which the Sulfur Caves are changing Minecraft Worldgen is the introduction of two new features, the first of which is the template feature. Oop, we got a geyser, that's awesome. Currently, templates are used to generate these little sulfur pools up on the surface above Sulfur Caves, and indeed, they take advantage of another feature that I think is underrated, the root system. If you dig down underneath this sulfur pool, then you'll see that there is a trail of mostly sulfur blocks as well as some cinnabar that extends down below. In fact, actually, I think that was still part of the template. So as we dig down lower here, you'll see that this is all a bunch of sulfur blocks that are kind of noisily mixed in with the stone. And this would actually keep going down until we hit the Sulfur Cave proper below. The way the root system feature works is it starts in the Sulfur Cave and extends upwards until it reaches the surface, at which point it places a new feature, that feature being the template. We'll explore what templates mean and how they work in a moment, but first let's introduce the second new feature that is changing Minecraft Worldgen, sequences. Sequences are used by vanilla in a bit of a limited capacity right now, but perhaps one of the most notable locations in which they're used is in the lakes themselves. These lake features first get placed by a sequence feature that places the lake and then places the potent sulfur block within that lake, particularly specifically in the middle of where the sequence started. It's kind of interesting that it was added in this way because the reason it's needed here specifically is because the lake feature, at least currently, although it accepts a block state provider, which allows you to declare several different block types that it can generate with for its barrier for the ground beneath the water, the block state provider for the lake feature behaves differently than other places that it's used, like block column features. If you define like a weighted state provider for the barrier, it's not going to make an individual lake have a mix of whichever block states you assigned various weights to. It's going to determine the weight that any given lake is going to have a barrier of all one of those block states. If it worked like a normal block state provider, they might not need to have added the sequence feature to get the potent sulfur block here added in the middle, because they would have been able to handle that in the block state provider. But because they can't, it seems that that is at least part of the reason why they added the sequence feature, or at least why they're using it for this. Let's head into a flat world and explore how vanilla uses these features on a technical level and how we can start to apply them to our own custom Worldgen. Let's start with templates. Like I said, currently the template feature is used only for the sulfur pools that get placed on the surface above the sulfur caves by that root system, like I mentioned. Technically, these are also using a sequence feature, but we're not focusing on that right now. So while this might look fairly random and generated, especially when you start to see multiple kinds of sulfur pools that are each various different sizes and arrangements, we've got a bit of a medium one there, a much smaller one like this really small one. Let's see if we can get a really huge one here. No, it doesn't seem like it. All right. Well, all of those looked quite a bit different from each other, so you might think that there's some natural generation going on, that this is a complex, highly configurable feature with regards to the size, shape, the amount of water, all that. But in fact, a template literally does mean a structure template file. All of the different sulfur pools are placing a structure template, and every time it chooses that particular structure template, it places it in exactly the same way, just like it would for any other structure. This is a particularly large one, and it is built to appear like it is sort of random and natural, but of course it was hand built. All of the tuff here is placed by hand. There's no processors being applied. It's just how this particular structure was built. And indeed, it was built to always have the potent sulfur blocks in those positions. No sequences being used here like for the lakes that you find down in the sulfur caves proper. So we've got large structure pieces, we've got small structure pieces, we've got multiple variants of each of these sizes so that things look natural and random and not necessarily samey or like they were hand built every time you find one of these sulfur pools. There's a whole bunch of these. And because the structures getting them to generate is pretty much exactly the same as getting any other structure to generate. Obviously, you first need to build a structure, something like this, with a structure block. You can include entities in it like an armor stand or a witch or what have you, and then you go ahead and make a template feature that is able to place that structure. You can make it able to rotate in any direction or lock it to rotate to a specific direction. So this one is able to rotate in any orientation, any of the 4 cardinal directions. And as you can see, every time it's getting placed, it has that armor stand along with it. And as part of the template feature, you can define multiple structure templates that it's able to place. You can assign them different weights for how likely, how often they're going to be able to generate. And for each of those, you can decide what rotations are allowed. So this one isn't allowed to rotate at all. This one is able to rotate east or west, but not forward or backward. And this one is only able to rotate forward or backward. It may not seem it from these very basic examples, but this is an incredibly powerful feature that gives us a huge amount of control over the shapes that we are able to place as part of world generation to create interesting and unique locations. Of course, this isn't the first feature that allowed us to place structures as features. Before this, we had the fossil feature, which I showed off in a recent video to explore how it could be utilized to place things like custom dungeons underground. The fossil feature works in much the same way. It allows you to place a structure template file that you've saved with a structure block somewhere in the world. And in this case, you can actually place 2 at the same time, or indeed, you have to place 2 at the same time. The base structure, the fossil structure, in this case, a box of cobblestone and mossy cobblestone, and then an overlay structure as well. In this case, a spawner and chests. The main advantage that templates have over fossils is that templates actually place where you are trying to place them. The biggest downside of fossils is that if you try to place them without any kind of special shenanigans or anything, then they get a weird random offset some number of blocks below the surface or below wherever you're trying to place them. Templates do not have this weird quirk. When you place them, they get placed where you expect. However, that isn't always how you want them to behave. For example, in this situation, I have a hill that I've made with some discs of grass, and I'm placing a template of some cobblestone ruins here. And as you can see, it's kind of floating because it found the highest block that it's centered on right here and placed relative to that. I could implement some block predicate filters and other placement modifiers to try to control and limit and minimize how often this happens, or indeed change the design of the structure so it has some terrain built underneath it. But with a fossil, we had the opportunity to use a gravity processor in order to make it melt and adhere to the terrain. This is, of course, an extreme example. In a normal hilly terrain area, the terrain would be just a little bit closer to itself, and so we'd get not quite as broken of a structure. But the point remains, this is something that fossils uniquely can do that templates cannot. The interesting thing is, with fossils, we have to do this in order to get them to generate on the surface, but we can use it to our advantage for particular structures when we want to. Whereas for templates, it is not an option, and so we feel like we're missing it. The true way of thinking is somewhere in the middle. Both of these features are good, neither is specifically better than the other, but they have different applications depending on the use case. So while we can't utilize templates in order to place structures on the terrain more easily that are meant to adhere to the terrain, we can still use it to more easily place structures on the surface that we want to stay intact. For example, this giant sunflower that could be used to decorate a custom sunflower fields biome. This example even allows us to one-up the fossil feature, because while it is small enough that we could use feature stacking to trick the fossil into staying intact and not adhering to the terrain when we project it up to the surface with a gravity processor, it would have some random rotation. With the template feature, we can define what rotations the template structure is allowed to be placed at, and so for this sunflower example, always make it face the same way as all the other sunflowers. Doesn't matter how many times I place this, it's not going to rotate, it'll always be facing the same direction, and because it's a template, it'll always be intact, regardless of whatever hilly terrain is nearby. Now, the sunflower is pretty neat, but I suspect the most common application for templates in custom Worldgen is going to be custom trees. It's just the most visible and applicable application, I guess, for lack of a better word, of being able to place unique and custom shapes intact on the surface in particular. This is a really cool blocky tree design built by Nick. And this right here is a really cute, smaller, more intimate birch design by Mind Designs. Both of these were available for free on Planet Minecraft and are linked in the description. They were built and intended for map makers to be able to decorate their unique environments, but now that we can place structure templates more conveniently on the surface, I imagine things like this might more frequently be applied to create custom forests like this that have all kinds of unique custom trees spread throughout. These designs obviously feature non-natural elements, and so they might still be mostly applied for custom maps and things, but being able to use custom Worldgen to place them more easily, I suspect is something that is not going to go unnoticed. And of course, I've already started applying templates to my own projects. In the Overrealm project for my updated deserts, I have a custom desert well that I'm placing with a fossil that I'm feature stacking with a disc above it so that it stays intact as it projects down below that disc onto the surface. And theoretically, I could now use a template to place the desert well instead and forgo the extra step, forgo the feature stacking to be able to place it just fully intact. Now, there are some reasons why I'm not doing this for the desert wells here in particular that I'll get into for a little bit later, but the fact remains that I can use templates now for things like this that I don't need that unique fossil behavior for. By the way, if you're enjoying the video, please remember to like and subscribe for more custom Worldgen structures and data pack content. If you want to learn to get into custom Worldgen yourself, check the link in the description for my very thorough written guide that I've made for Data Pack Hub, where I am an official helper. Now let's go back to talking about those sulfur pools here, because like I mentioned before, not only is this using a template feature, but it's also using a sequence feature. The sequence feature is very simple. It allows you to define a list of placed features, and then it places all of those features one at a time at the origin or relative to the origin that the sequence feature is getting placed at. If that sounds like feature stacking in vanilla, that's exactly what it is. Mojang have finally done it. They've done away with our need to use weird tricks with marker blocks in the sky and vegetation patches to place specific features relative to one another. There's just a whole sequence feature that allows us to place an arbitrary number of features arbitrarily relative to one another or relative to one specific origin point. For the sulfur pools in particular, the sequence feature first places the template pool and then places a random spread of simple block features to surround it with these individual little tough blocks that are not part of the structure template here. So it feels a little bit more natural and built into the ground. Like I was mentioning before, those lakes in the Sulfur Caves are using a sequence to first place the lake, and then at the origin point, happens to be right here, it just scans downward and then places a simple block for the potent sulfur if it finds sulfur that has water above it. So technically, you can get a lake feature. This is a very close try, where it generates as two smaller lakes or with a weird kind of rim in the middle, and then there isn't water there, and that potent sulfur block will fail to get placed. Here we go. This is an example right here. So because there was no sulfur block that had water above it in this particular lake feature, then it did not place that potent sulfur anywhere. This allows us to just completely erase the old method of feature stacking that, like I said, utilized a marker block somewhere in the sky and then placed a vegetation patch above it that then placed as a vegetation feature a new feature offset and projected to a height map over and over again until you had the entire feature stack, at which point you would place one final feature to remove the marker block. And we had to do that so that the marker block was out of the way and so that we could search and locate that particular location. Now though, just a single sequence feature that lists all of those individual placed features in them gets placed all relative to one another at that height map, and then we can just move everything from there. So we get this really beautiful tree much more consistently, still made of all of the same composite parts, but all so much simpler. Basically, all this does is bring the ability to place multiple features relative to each other to build these custom shapes out of multiple different features to the masses, and opens the door for anybody to be able to feature stack. And frankly, because of this, it makes certain kinds of feature stacking just that much easier and therefore probably more likely to show up. As an extreme example, take this geode. You may recognize this as the jungle geode from my old geodes video, and previously, all of the little plants inside, well, this one doesn't have a crack, let's break in. Previously, all these spore blossoms and cave vines and azalea bushes and everything were being placed by inner placements to demonstrate that they get kind of placed everywhere regardless of whether they have the ability to get placed there, regardless of whether there is a block to support them, either below for grasses and bushes and things, or above for the vines and spore blossoms. Now though, we can use a sequence to first place the geode that has no inner placements, and then place another feature that is a simple block feature that gets randomly spread throughout the entire space of the geode and actually checks if there is space and support for the particular simple block it is placing. So we have a simple block feature that is checking if there's a block above and then chooses randomly whether to place a spore blossom or a cave vine, and same for below to choose whether it places a bush or short grass or a moss carpet. And we've even got one more feature getting placed as part of the sequence that tries to place a tree somewhere on the ground here, something that would have been so difficult, probably close to impossible, frankly, with the old method of feature stacking by having to place the marker block in the sky. If we wanted this underground, getting the tree to generate in here would have been so performance intensive, if possible at all, and now it's just one feature away. These jungle geodes are probably one of the coolest examples of things that we can now do with sequences, period, or at least more easily with sequences. One other cool thing we can do, you may be familiar with the old rumor that if you find a circle of clay in a swamp biome or similar, which used to be true but no longer is, you could dig down and find diamonds with relative consistency. This was always just a coincidence, a fluke of world generation and the random number generator that Minecraft uses as it places and spreads different features within a given chunk. And it's no longer even true anymore. However, now we can make this true intentionally. If we clear that away, we can place a feature using a sequence that is a random spread of stone and copper ore and things up here on the surface, like a small surface ore deposit. But then dig down below that and see that we find tons of raw copper as part of the same feature that is specifically here because this feature generated on the surface, or that the feature that was on the surface clued the player in that there was something to look for down below. Just tons and tons of raw copper being placed by a totally different feature, but all thanks to the sequence feature. Essentially true feature landmarks that allow the player to keep an eye out for things on the surface to clue them in for what is below, without the need for a root system like the Sulfur Caves used to place those sulfur pools above the Sulfur Caves. Now, going back a bit, I mentioned earlier that I would not use a template feature in order to place these desert wells, and I would instead stick with the fossil feature. And the reason for this is the main limitation that templates have, which is that they can't have processors applied to them like fossils can. Processors are really nice because they allow you to add some random variation to a structure as it gets placed. For example, suspicious sand hidden in the sand of the desert well here. I can't do this with a template, I have to do it with a processor. And so I'm sticking with fossils for this, as well as several of the other structures that I place as part of the overrealm. However, that doesn't mean that you can't apply randomness to templates at all. Say we have a structure like this that we want to place as a template, but we want to apply some random variation so that some of the glowstone gets turned into air, maybe some of the polished diorite is regular diorite, maybe sometimes this packed ice is either water or air, but we want to place it as a template so that it stays intact without needing to worry about fossil stuff, which means we don't have the ability to use a processor. Well, we could just place a sequence that places the template feature first, and then places a disk feature that has a bunch of rule-based state providers applied to it to apply that random variation for us after the fact. Not exactly the same as a processor, in some ways more powerful because it allows us to check more than just the specific location and the block that is being replaced like a processor would, but also a little bit less powerful, because we can't place NBT blocks like the suspicious sand. Nor, of course, could we use the gravity processor even if we wanted to make this template adhere to the terrain. The other, not necessarily limitation that sequences have, but certainly a quirk that is important to be aware of, is their ability to stop mid-sequence. Let's take a look at the same jungle geode sequence as before. So I'm placing the geode first, and then I'm trying to place all the features inside of it. But as you can see, it has failed to do so. We don't have any features inside of it. And the reason for that is because I placed the tree feature for this particular sequence before all of the other features. The tree feature is trying to find some stable ground to get placed on, and I specifically made it so that it's only able to attempt to place one tree per sequence, one tree per geode. So if that tree fails to find a valid spawning space, for example, if it gets randomly spread and ends up like right here in the middle of the air, or inside the moss block right below me or something, it's not able to generate. And if the sequence ever reaches a feature that fails to generate because its placement modifiers prevented it from doing so, that and all of the subsequent features will all fail to generate. So because I had the tree feature sequenced before all of these simple blocks that place the spore blossoms and stuff, those failed to generate because the tree failed. We can go ahead and try again and see if we can get a successful geode generation. Nope, not this time. Here we go. So this one ended up being able to successfully place the tree. It found some stable ground to generate it on, and so then it was able to place all the simple block features just fine. Now, there may be times where you can use this behavior to your advantage. There may be a feature that you do only want to generate if a previous feature successfully generated, and so you can make the placement modifiers for that feature in the sequence check for that condition. But you also need to be aware of it because it could prevent features that you intend to generate regardless from being able to, because an earlier feature that is optional didn't end up succeeding. It would be kind of nice if we had a variant of the sequence feature that placed all the features regardless of success. I know Bedrock has a Worldgen feature that behaves that way, in addition to one that behaves like this sequence feature. So it'd be great if we had that parity as well, but at the very least, knowing that that quirk of the sequence feature exists will help a lot. And at the end of the day, it's hard to complain when the Chaos Cubed update has added these two incredibly powerful features that are absolutely sure to change how we approach custom Worldgen, custom dimensions, custom biomes, all of that stuff forever. Remember to like and subscribe for more custom Worldgen structures and data pack content. To learn more about custom Worldgen, check the link in the description for my very thorough written guide. And to support the channel and participate in NPC fights at the end of every video like this one, please consider joining my Patreon. Congratulations to today's winner, Josh Saruda, and thanks for watching!